You are about to conclude your time in the Gambia and move on to other things. Let's begin by you looking back on your time here in the Gambia, Colin.
Well, it's been a fascinating, almost like 3.25 years, and if anybody had suggested in 2014 that I would be here to see the demise of former President Jammeh, not many people would have believed that could actually happen. 2014 was quite a difficult year for us when Jammeh threatened to close MRC, and that went right down to the wire. Had that happened, I think it would have been a major event for the Gambia, given the number of people that the MRC employs, the impact it has on the Gambian economy, and also from the medical research point of view. But I eventually got a meeting with Jammeh and was able to get him to reverse his decision. He almost sort of put the blame on me by saying, yes, it would be very embarrassing if MRC did have to close so early on your watch. So he almost inferred he was doing me a favour personally rather than actually making the right decision. But thankfully the right decision was reached. So that was sort of 14, and then we had the amazing outcome of the December election.
Mm-hmm. When he tried to put the blame on you, did you laugh?
It wasn't really in a laughing mood at the time, because I was conscious of the impact it would have on the economy, the number of people that get medical treatment, the excellent work MRC does. So it was quite tense. We were at State House. I think he had about 10 of the cabinet ministers there. Obviously they were saying nothing and he was holding court. And he started off by being quite aggressive, saying that he didn't like diplomats very much, that they said one thing and did another, and never got to the point. And then when I did start to speak, he interrupted me and just said, come on, if you've something to say, then say it. So in the end I just said, I want you to change your decision. Thankfully he did. It's history now, but it was a nervous couple of months in 2014 when the threat was there.
And what was his reason for wanting to close down MRC?
He'd heard on the TV that there was some trials, a second round of trials linked to Ebola, and felt he had not been consulted, when in fact MRC had been completely open with the ministry and the government about it. So I think it was a fit of pique, and that one of those sort of on the hoof decisions that sadly we were not uncommon under the previous regime. The decision to leave the Commonwealth, for example, which I know still hurts many Gambians, but thankfully President Barrow has made it a priority to get back into the Commonwealth, and we hope that they can have a rapid and smooth transition and be able to take part in CHOGM next year in London as a full member.
As far as you know, what's holding back our return to the Commonwealth?
There's a process that was established in 2007 at the Kampala CHOGM, where countries have to meet certain criteria. There's about 7 or 8 points set out. So the country that wishes to apply has to satisfy the other member states that all these conditions are met. They're to do with governance, democracy, freedom of speech, NGOs being able to operate, that sort of thing. Good governance and democracy, basically. So it's simply a case of confirming that they do, the aspiring country meets these requirements, and then the Commonwealth Secretariat will send out a small fact-finding team and then make a recommendation to the other countries. In Gambia's case, they've already written to say that they do meet the criteria set out. So the next stage basically will be a visit from the Secretariat, and then hopefully consultation with the other 52 members and a return. And one of Gambia's sort of big selling points in getting back in quickly is that it wasn't a national plebiscite that took them out. It wasn't the people deciding. It was a unilateral decision by the then president. And certainly one of the things that's been brought to my attention on a regular basis from the Gambian people is their desire to return, and I'm sure they'll be welcomed back into the Commonwealth family.
And, in all these exchanges between the Gambia and the Commonwealth Secretariat, were you copied in? Were you made aware of what was happening?
Well, I have regular contact with the foreign minister and other cabinet ministers, so I'm aware of what's doing, but we're technically not involved in the process other than being one of the 52 member states. But I think Boris Johnson, when he visited, made it clear that he fully supports Gambia's desire to return to the Commonwealth, and the United Kingdom will do what it can to make that smooth and rapid.
I see also in the newspapers you have stated England supporting Nabarro for World Health Organization Director General. How's that going? Is the Gambia backing your candidate?
Well, I hope so. I think the case for Dr. Nabarro is a very strong one. As I set out in the newspaper article that was written, I think he has the right qualities for this demanding task. WHO has been in the limelight in the time that I've been here because of the Ebola and the aftermath of Ebola. So it's important that WHO has the right leader at the top. Nabarro has experience from being involved in the Ebola outbreak. And he's also very strong on how development links into health. So I think from this continent's point of view of the candidates, he is, in my view, the strongest. And I hope that when the vote comes later this month in Geneva that he is the winner. And I think the organisation and Africa will benefit from his leadership.
Quite apart from the newspaper article, you haven't picked the brain of the Gambian health minister on where Gambia stands on this matter.
We've lobbied them and they've listened, and I hope that they will vote as we have encouraged them to do. But it's a matter for Gambia to decide how they vote, but I hope our arguments have been persuasive.
What other encounters, if any, did you have with Jammeh, apart from the MRC case?
There was the famous incident in 22 July Square when he accused the United Kingdom of having been involved in the coup. And then when we went up at the end to shake hands with him, so we were about to leave, he commented that I didn't look particularly happy, and he said that he had nothing against the United Kingdom. I said to him that I was sorry, but it didn't come across that way. To be accused of being involved in a coup attempt was not, without any facts to back it up, was not the basis for a cordial bilateral relationship. And at that stage he then took the mic and apologised publicly and said that there was no evidence at that stage to show any UK involvement. So it was a surprising climb down, but one I certainly welcomed. And of course there was no UK involvement in the events of it was 30 December 14, I think. Yes, it seems a long time ago now. But and then there was another occasion when we were having a discussion. I can't remember what it was about, but he reminded me that whilst he could not throw me in jail, he could throw me out of the country, as he had threatened to do to Phil Sinkinson, one of my great predecessors. So it was never dull dealing with the former President Jammeh, but I'm glad that my successor will have the benefit of dealing with the new regime and President Barrow and a new Gambia, where we're now pushing open doors and starting the mighty task of getting this nation back on track, because there's no doubt that President Barrow and his coalition inherited an absolute mess, empty coffers, and a nation that's basically almost on the verge of being a failed state. So they have a tremendous task ahead of them, and I hope that the Gambian people realise that and will give them the time to make the changes that are required and support them through the coming years.
Since you've already gone into Barrow's time, let's talk about his first 100 days. I mean, you were here for his election. You saw the enthusiasm all around his election success. His first 100 days, how would you assess them?
There's a couple of things people need to bear in mind. Whilst the election was on 1 December, President Barrow didn't return to sort of take the helm until late January. So his 100 days of him being back in country, I think, didn't technically finish until early May. And during that period there was National Assembly elections as well, which was certainly was a diversion for this coalition of 7 political parties and Aïssatou Touré as the independent. And to hold that coalition together in normal circumstances, I think, is a challenge. To do it, when you had National Assembly elections going on at the same time, which they had to fight on a party-to-party basis, was a pretty big distraction. But I think credit should be given to the coalition for sticking together through that, even though there were times when it looked like it might fracture. That was certainly a distraction, but in the time that President Barrow has been in charge, I think there's been lots of positives. His decision to rejoin the ICC, to rescind the decision to withdraw, was a good one. To get back into the Commonwealth as well was a good one. Release of political prisoners, his commitment to human rights and governance, his immediate addressing of people at the heads of some of the parastatals and the institutions like NIA, removing some of those at the top to show that there is going to be change, I think is also commendable. That's happened again quite quickly. Successful negotiations with the IMF. The EU have also committed, now that we're in a different relationship, to give budget support, which they didn't previously have. So there's been lots of positives. The United Kingdom has agreed to fund a special advisor in the Attorney General's office for the next 3 years to help on institutional, constitutional and legal reform. That's a big step. I also just the other day secured funding to train 160 NIA officers, or SIS as it is going to be called. And I think it's important that when President Barrow said that he's going to change these organisations that supported the misrule and tyranny of Jammeh, that it does happen, and we're committed to supporting that. So it's not going to be a case of the same wine in a different bottle. The desire to reform organisations like the NIA is sincere, and we will help to achieve that, and hopefully in a relatively short period of time organisations like that can start to gain the confidence of the public as their new role becomes clearer. So I would say in these first 100 days the glass is definitely half full. Has all of the positive achievements necessarily been conveyed to the public in as clear and precise a manner as it might have been? Perhaps not. I think they've actually done more than a lot of the public are aware of. So if I was to suggest an area for more work to be done, it's in the strategic communications and getting across the achievements that have happened. The public needs to realise that change isn't going to happen overnight. We're not suddenly going to go from what they inherited to a strong economy with lots of job opportunities in a very short period of time. That can't happen. It's just impossible. But I think there's enough that's being done on the positive side to lay a foundation. And if at the end of the administration of President Barrow a foundation has been laid for the next 5 years, that I think would be success. And I think at the moment the glass is half full, so optimistic.
So all the criticism that he seems to get in the local media and especially on social media, you would say is coming maybe out of impatience and lack of maybe information about what actually the government is doing.
Yeah, precisely that. Impatience, which I understand because the public want to see change. You've also got the change in the way that journalists can now write. Journalists can now be critical and express their views more freely than they could in the past, and some of them are certainly enjoying that freedom. But I think you're right. It's a combination of impatience and maybe not fully understanding the slightly cautious approach that the government is taking. But I think being prudent at the moment is not a bad thing, and some things are urgent and need to be dealt with, power supply for example. But I can also understand why they want to go through tendering processes and make sure that when they give projects to companies to do things, that it's been done in a transparent way and wasn't like the old regime where it was done on grace and favour effectively. In
terms of his priorities, because you hear, well, justice is a priority, energy is a priority, the economy is a priority. If you were Adama Barrow, knowing the mess that Yahya Jammeh left behind, where would you have started?
I think the first thing has got to be power supply. If you want people to come and invest in the country, power supply is vital. People will not come and invest and sort of establish factories or whatever it is they want them to do if there isn't a power supply. So that certainly has to be a priority. I think a number of these priorities can run in parallel, because I think we're seeing far better delegation to the ministries than we saw in the previous regime, where every single decision was taken at State House by one man. I think you can have a number of priority sectors running in tandem, so there's no reason why justice, energy and economic reform can't run hand in hand. You've got perfectly capable people leading these ministries, and that's definitely the way forward. That there's a devolved authority, and decisions are made at departmental level and implemented. That's a big change. 22 years where that didn't happen, and to create change in culture again will take time. The civil servants will need to do more. The PSs and the senior members of each ministry will need to be more proactive in looking for solutions for their particular problems, whether it's in justice, energy, whether it's the petroleum, the offshore oil blocks, or whatever, infrastructure. These people will need to step up to the plate and be giving sound advice to their ministers, and again helping, communicating with the public so that the public know what's happening.
After he won election, he promised to unify the country and be every Gambian's president. Now, recently he appointed 20 ambassadors, one of whom was the former speaker under Yahya Jammeh, Abdoulaye Bojang, to be sent to South Africa. And it's drawn a lot of controversy. A lot of people aren't happy that somebody who was a key figure in the APRC, with all that Yahya Jammeh and the APRC are accused of having done, now being tapped and made ambassador. What do you think?
I can understand some of the concern, but I can also understand the desire not to go through sort of like happened in Iraq, where there's a de-Baathification, where everybody that was linked to Saddam Hussein was put out, anybody that was linked to the Ba'ath Party was put out. And I think President Barrow was clear during the campaign time that that would not happen here, that those people who had committed wrong would be judged by international standards and if necessary brought to court. And I see the Attorney General is making excellent progress in that area. I think he's doing an outstanding job. He's set out a vision for his ministry, and I think that's very encouraging. It should be based on merit, and a lot of people also, we should bear in mind, didn't have much choice about serving the Jammeh regime. If you didn't serve it, you would finish up in mile 2.
Or worse.
Yeah, or worse indeed, or far worse, yeah. And I think there's a difference between those who served willingly and really seemed to enjoy it, and those who served reluctantly. And I think getting that balance right is going to be virtually impossible. People will criticise him for going too far, APRC people, for example, and just because somebody is a member of APRC doesn't necessarily mean that they were a great supporter of Jammeh and all the things that he did. And it's finding that balance, which isn't easy, but I think you can't overreact, and I think again being prudent is the right way forward.
You spoke about the Justice Minister. How do you see him?
I think he's a great example of somebody who's come back from a very good job in Arusha dealing with Rwanda to come back and serve his country. I think his commitment is commendable. And there's a number of other ministers in similar position. The new Minister for Environment, we know these guys well because they were former Chevening scholars, and we have a lot to do with them. And there's a number of good ministers there that, again, need to be given time to settle into their ministries and create the changes within their ministries where the civil servants start to become more proactive, rather than doing what happened in the last 22 years, which was reacting to the dictate of the guy in State House. But no, I think to come back to the Attorney General, I think he's made an excellent start. I say we work closely with him. We fund a position in his ministry as a special advisor. We see that as an important area and an area where the public want to see progress. And come back to my earlier point, there's no reason why the Attorney General can't be making excellent progress in those areas at the same time as his counterpart at the Ministry of Energy and Petroleum is also making progress. So you can have more than one priority, but again, it's just a case of conveying that to the public and letting the public know what progress is being made. That's important to keep them informed.
Earlier on you talked about Barrow inheriting virtually an empty pot. How is the UK helping him, get something to work with?
Well, we're obviously members of the international financial institutions, member of the UN and the EU. 15% of what the EU spends here comes from UK taxpayers. I think our contribution to the UN is 5% as well. So we're putting, a lot in there. The EU is also, I think, funding ECOMIG at the moment. So there's been lots of taps that were previously closed have been opened. Now, these might not necessarily have a massive impact on the ground immediately, but they will help the country to get back on its feet. The beauty is here, it's a nation of less than 2 million people. So it's around here, and it would be, for example, a country of over 100 million. But it will take time. We're also talking closely with the Gambia about other areas where we can do work, try to get more inward investment into the country. The new Gambia is appealing to many British companies. I've had inquiries from a number that people that just previously would not be prepared to take the risk of investing in the Gambia. Now they're interested in doing so. And these are across a number of sectors. But that's early days. These companies didn't have Gambia on their schedule. And that's the other thing as well to bear in mind, that a lot of funding for countries is done over a 5-year period or a 3-year period. Nobody had pots of money set aside for Gambia in November, knowing that Jammeh was going to be beaten in December. So it's a case of having to sort of look again at priorities and see if we can't find savings from other parts of the world where we've got activities and then re-divert that. The great thing is, with a nation being so small, we don't have to get huge amounts of money to have an impact in Gambia. It's not like a nation of, say, Nigeria of 160 million people, where you would need to have huge resources to have an impact. Relatively small amounts, and I'm sure that the two main donors, the EU and the UN, will be operating in a very different environment to that of last year, and the Gambian people will gradually start to see the benefits of that, whether it's in poverty reduction, infrastructure, feeder roads or whatever. But people will gradually start to see those projects kicking in and having an impact.
Going back to November, when the coalition idea was being formulated, what we understood was Barrow was going to serve 3 years, and then we would go back to elections. Knowing what you know now and the challenges that he faces, would 3 years be a reasonable thing? The Constitution says 5. Would 5 be better than 3?
I'm not a constitutional expert, and this, I'm sure, will be debated long and hard. My understanding is, from people that are constitutional experts, that the Constitution trumps the MOU, so they should stay in power for 5 years, not 3 years. The only way it could happen is if Barrow were to stand down, and the Vice President and the Speaker all to stand down.
We don't have a Vice President yet.
Well, when there is a Vice President, in that case, and the President and the Speaker, but that, I think, would be a bit untidy. I think it probably makes more sense to honour the Constitution, and that seems to be the feeling that's shared by many Gambians, that the Constitution is important. They need to amend the the way it was butchered by Jammeh in the past, and I think that will be a priority for the Attorney General, and they can crack on and do that. But my feeling is it will probably end up being a 5-year term that meets the Constitution, and they will need all of that to get the country turned around and heading in the right direction. And I hope and wish them well that they can make incremental steps over that period, and that people will start to see the differences, and that there'll be tangible benefits for them. But again, managing expectations is a key challenge, and that means, I think, perhaps a bit more communication from the President and the key ministries.
Have you met the Chief Justice, and if yes, what sort of a man do you find him to be?
I've met him briefly, so I'm not really in a position to comment. I know that he was educated in the UK. Certainly when I met him, we had a very pleasant conversation, and he seemed to me to be a very wise and learned individual. So he struck me as being a good appointment.
Mm-hmm. And what do you think of Gambians now dominating the high courts?
I think that's good. There was always no doubt that Gambia had enough qualified people. I've heard some people say that some of them maybe lack experience, but it's a bit like young, talented sports people. They're too young to be in the first team, but they're too good not to be in it. And I think that I think was it the other week? I think 6 were appointed, 5 of whom were Gambians, 1 was Sierra Leonean. And I think that's a positive thing. And, I think this is a nation that should have its own people determining its future and where it goes, and not foreigners that were on the payroll of a dictatorial president.
Mm. Many a youth feel that youths have not been properly rewarded by President Barrow. If that were the case, would you say he's missing an opportunity, given that the youths played a major role in his election?
I'm not sure how you can reward them so quickly. I think the best reward that the youth can have is stability in the country and better opportunities in the future. But as I've said, that can't happen overnight. Patience will be required on the part of the public, and perhaps a little bit more urgency on the part of the government. But they need to be given time. I've spoken to the youth and sports minister and other ministers, and everyone recognises that it's a particularly important part of the community. The migration problem that has affected Gambia is severe in per capita terms. They finish up topping most of the numbers that go to Europe, and that needs to stop. That will only stop if there are better opportunities for young Gambians here. Extending the tourism season, I know, is something that the tourist minister is looking at doing. That might not seem great, but if they can get an extra few weeks at each end of it, that impacts on the restaurants and the hotels and jobs, and it makes the lean period even shorter. So there's a number of different things that will have to happen, but I think for the youth, they need to show some patience and some recognition that the task that President Barrow and his team are facing is enormous, and it will take time.
Colin, we've virtually covered every area, and tomorrow you have your farewell reception. How is it beginning to feel that close to 4 years you've been in this country, you've seen the ups, you've seen the downs, and and when you look ahead, what kind of future would you say the Gambia has?
It will be a wrench to leave, because it's been such an interesting time, especially the last sort of eight months or so. Really the last year, probably, from the marches in April, May last year, which was I think the beginning of the real change that occurred in the country. I will keep a close eye. I wish this nation well. I think that it has the potential to do a lot better. I like the fact that President Barrow wants the country to be more engaged internationally. We're seeing that already. I think the relationship with ECOWAS is improving. ECOWAS played a key role in helping that transition to happen. President Barrow recognises that and sees them as key allies. I think the relationship with Senegal is on a far better footing. Hopefully we will not see the nonsense of the border closures and stuff like that. It's the relationship between the two countries needs to be a strong one, and it's great to see them heading back in that direction. So I just think we'll see a bit more of Gambia on globally. They'll be a bit more prominent, certainly in Africa, and I'm optimistic that given time and a bit of patience that the country's heading in the right direction, and I wish it well with all my heart. It's been an amazing 3 years plus, and I will certainly, as I say, keep a careful eye. The reception is tomorrow. I'm doing it ahead of the holy month of Ramadan, and then I will finally depart on the end of June, and my successor, Sharon Wardle, will arrive in the middle of July. So she will continue to do the work that this embassy has been doing with the new government, and helping to help them achieve their objectives.
Do you know where you're headed next?
Not yet. I'm hoping to find out before I leave here, but and if I do, then I'll make it known where I'm going. So time will tell.
Do you have a particular country you would like to be posted to?
I have an interview for a job later this week, and if I'm successful, I would still be on the continent, so that would also please me.
Fantastic. Colin, thank you very much, and safe journey to you and Joanne, and I'm sure you'll be happy to be reunited with family back in the UK, however briefly that might be.
Thank you very much indeed, Peter. It's a pleasure. Thank you.